At the current pace, we are on track to encounter close to 1 million illegal aliens at our southern border this year. Our capacity is already severely restrained, but these increases will overwhelm the system entirely. This is not a manufactured crisis. This is truly an emergency.
Homeland Security Secretary Dhs Nielsen making the case for the president's national emergency declaration after staggering new numbers on increased apprehensions at the border. But despite this, opposition to the president's move seems to be snowballing in the Senate. Joining us now, Senate Majority Whip John Thune. Senator, good morning to you. Thank you for coming on. Her testimony or hearing continues on Capitol Hill as we speak. She's going to continue to face questions, obviously on the emergency declaration, family separations at the border. A lot of tough questions going to be thrown the Secretary's way this morning.
That's right, but the facts are there is a crisis at the border, and the numbers that she's putting out that are more recent show that the numbers are spiking. We were averaging about 60,000 illegal border crossings every month. This last month, that was 76,000. Of course, we know in that group you've got drug dealers and traffickers and gang members. You also have a lot of unaccompanied children and families with children coming across the border, which creates the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing too. So she's speaking to the emergency that exists. I think we all agree with that, which is why the president is correct to push Congress as hard as he possibly can to try and get funding and the resources that are necessary to address it.
She called the current projections dire when it comes to the numbers that we're seeing at the border. She said the agency is now on track to apprehend more migrants crossing illegally in the first 6 months of the year than the entirety of 2017. She talked about that being truly an emergency and making the case that this is not a manufactured crisis. Is she going to convince her critics in that hearing room this morning?
I don't know that she'll convince the Democrats in the House. They seem to have made up their minds, and honestly, we wouldn't be having this conversation, Sandra, if it weren't for the hatred the Democrats in the Congress have for the president, which has blinded them to the need to address what is a major crisis. And, you know, she needs resources down there, manpower, technology, all the things that are necessary from a national security standpoint to ensure that we're protecting the country, but also to address what has become a major humanitarian crisis at the border. And so, like I said, the facts are there. The evidence is all there. She's just got an audience that is, I think, unfortunately blinded by the hatred they have for this president.
So fair to say you still fully support the president in his move to declare a national emergency to secure the funding?
We're going to vote on that here in the Senate. I, like a lot of my colleagues, have had questions. We're still asking those questions about it. But we think that he needs to get as many resources as he can. Congress has appropriated some money. There are some other funds that he can tap through reprogramming that enable him to address the crisis. The emergency declaration is the last resort. And we have, of course, a number of our senators who've expressed concerns about the precedent that sets for a future potential Democratic president. But nonetheless, everybody in the Senate agrees. I shouldn't say everybody, but every Republican in the Senate agrees that this is a crisis, that it needs to be addressed, and that the president needs resources to address it.
Meanwhile, a lot of talk still about some of these big ideas being thrown out by members of Congress, Democrats, in the Medicare for All plan. Some cold water being thrown on that idea by an unlikely source, the House Democrats' new campaign chief, talking about the Medicare for All plan, saying it's one idea and warning that its estimated $33 trillion price tag was, quote, a little scary. Interesting to hear that from him.
Well, it's a recognition of reality, and you know, these people are living in fantasy land if they think that a government-run healthcare system at a cost of $33 trillion, a Green New Deal that, again, somewhere between $51 and $93 trillion, which ends up being about $650,000 per family, per household in this country over the next 10 years. These are all ideas that Democrats are advancing, and I think it demonstrates the hard left turn that their party has taken here in Congress and the socialist ideas that are now being advanced by their party. And I think that the American people, I think, realize that this is something they're going to end up having to pay for, and when they realize that, they're going to think this is a really bad idea and that this Green New Deal is a really raw deal for them.
Yeah, the estimates aren't there's not a really big range. I mean, all the estimates are $32 to $33 trillion. By the way, that was Sherry Bustos of Illinois, the chairwoman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. So that was her voice on that. I've only got a few seconds left, but this quickly, seems like it's shaping up to be the 2020 target for Republicans, taking on ideas like that, along with some of the socialism ideas that we've seen thrown out by some of the newer members of Congress. Final thoughts, Senator.
Right, absolutely. This is going to be a great contrast in 2020. This is a Democrat Party that's been co-opted by their hard left and which is putting forward ideas that are in direct contradiction with everything that this country is about. The freedom, the individualism, giving people more power and more authority to control their own lives and their own destinies, or having the government run it through central planning. And that's what the Democrats are advancing.
Great to have you on this morning. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Sandra.
There's a major surge at the southern border. U.S. Customs and Border Protection releasing new stats showing a nearly 100% increase in asylum seekers compared to just last year. And the number of family units detained up by 300%. Democrats mostly ignoring the new data, instead going after Homeland Security Secretary Dhs Nielsen during a hearing today on Capitol Hill.
Can you independently make a decision in contrary to the President of the United States on behalf of the American people for what is best for them?
Ma'am, what I can tell you is I take my oath with utmost extreme importance. I always do my best.
Let me tell you, Madam Secretary, either you're lying to this committee or you don't know what's happening at the border.
Wow. And in a dramatic moment, Nielsen describes just how dangerous it is for children crossing the border.
As you know, sir, very unfortunately, because of the increase in violence at ICE, when we have families with children, we have to give every girl a pregnancy test over 10. This is not a safe journey.
All right, against my better judgment, I'm going to go to Juan with you first here. New York Times leads story, border at breaking point. And they talk about the broken records of families coming across. It's a real crisis, don't you agree?
I think that what you have is what we've been calling a humanitarian crisis, if that's what you're talking about. It's not about an invading army. What we have is over half of this 76,000 in the last few months is 40,000 families and an additional 7,250 kids. So it's like 2/3 of this is families, and they're largely from, not from Mexico, by the way, right. El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. Yep. And when they come, they're not like running in and running somewhere and joining again. They're specifically saying we're seeking asylum because we're fleeing violence, poverty, and hunger. So that's a different dynamic than the one described, of course, in the middle of the midterms or even now in the call for an emergency.
But you admit that there's a humanitarian crisis at the border.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you can have
We have Juan on the record as admitting there's a crisis.
Yes, there is.
Dana, what do you think? These numbers are astronomical.
They were, and they broke records in the first 5 months that they usually would do over a year. And so, what I don't like about this hearing is that you had the Democratic Congress people ascribing terrible intentions to the secretary and suggesting that she has no idea what's going on at the border. I mean, that's extremely insulting. That's what she does all day long. She's got incredible amount of responsibilities. Part of it was preparing for that hearing to go up there so that she could be berated by them. And look, on the Republican side, they say, you agree with this, you agree. Yes. I think the thing is, like, we should all be able to agree that it's a humanitarian crisis that needs to be dealt with, right? Okay, so the Democrats don't like the wall idea. They think that's a bad one. Okay, so then what else are you suggesting to help stop the flow?
Right.
And I don't see any of that.
Right.
I don't see anything that they're suggesting that would actually stop it.
But I think there are suggestions about increasing space for detention, the judges to get this done, even arguments about whether or not we change the law.
Well, I mean, that's a great start, changing some of the asylum laws, Greg, that have these loopholes where if you're from Central America and you step foot in there with a minor, boom, send this country home free.
Sanctuary cities do not help the humanitarian crisis because what you're doing is you're suggesting that it's a lower barrier to entry. So what you're getting you're not getting asylum seekers, you're getting people that think, okay, this is going to be easier. They get raped. They get duct taped. They're given pills in case they're raped. The media drives me nuts because first it's a crisis, then it's not a crisis, then it's a crisis. I realize it's only a crisis if it hurts Trump. All right? So the media cannot be trusted on the coverage of this issue because the issue for them is driven by conflict. If you point to evidence and say you need enhanced border security, they will call you a bigot because they need the conflict to get the clickbait, to make the money. So if somebody new takes over and says exactly what Trump's saying, they'll be behind it. But until then, their breaking news at CNN will be parents deported without children, but their crisis won't be mentioned about the rapes in the caravans and stuff in the New York Times. That's a crisis.
And one of the things you mentioned in the New York Times that I found buried in the very last page was that the cartels and the smugglers send these mini caravans across the border one way, and then while Border Patrol is distracted, they send the drugs through the other way.
That's right. I mean, and you have to do two things. You have to disincentivize people who are coming here illegally. This is separate from the asylum issue. You have to disincentivize it. They can't feel that they have access, that they can easily come over. And then the second thing you have to do is you have to modify the asylum laws. Whether we expand the deportation centers or the processing centers, as you said, Juan, or expand our ability there or increase Border Patrol agents, that's all fine and good, but that's not doing anything about the influx of the people coming over. And the issue with the language for asylum is that credible fear. People are concerned that it's too broad, that essentially a lot of these people coming from these countries, what defines, you know, a credible fear of persecution? Are they talking about something that's coming from a position of authority or a leader? Are they talking about something happening in their own home? Is that language so broad now that you have a bunch of people using the asylum clause that shouldn't actually fall under the asylum clause? Because the bottom line is you have to be able to manage this in some way. You cannot have an influx of this many people coming across the border. We can't sustain it. We can't vet it. And it's just not workable. This situation is not sustainable.
And sometimes, like, you're right, it is a credible fear of persecution, but then you have instances where people are recycling children to then just use as props to bring across in order to get...
That's good for the environment.
That's good. AOC supports that.